Today is Friday, October the 12th, and this is The Drill. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. So yesterday I was talking about prima facie cases for change, and gave you a couple examples, and this morning I've got another example of a prima facie case for change, and that is any situation in which something has been tried, experiment of some sort, and the experiment fails. An example of this is our current economic system. Our current economic system, by the way, we're not capitalist. Okay, everybody says, "Oh, the United States is capitalist." No, we're not. We're Keynesian, just like the rest of the world. Okay, and it's the same thing like Venezuela. Their economic system isn't socialist. Their social system, their culture, may be socialist. Their political system may be socialist, but economically they are Keynesian. That's part of the reason that their economy is collapsing. But anyways, the point is, because the whole world has to be on the same political or economic system. You can have some people on the gold standard, some people doing Keynes, and other people doing socialism. Doesn't work because we all have to trade with one another. Okay, and so the whole world is Keynes, using Keynesian economics, which means that instead of having gold or silver to back our money, or using gold or silver as money, we are using just paper. We are using basically confidence, and we are using debt. So, and we use the government to manipulate our economy in various ways in order to try to keep the economy stable. The biggest criticism of our economy pre-Keynes was that the world economies were that there was too many boom and bust cycles. You'd have things going very great, fantastic, and then all of a sudden the bubble would pop and we'd be plunged into a recession or a depression. And so there were those that said that's not good enough. We can do better. We can smooth it out so that there is ever increasing prosperity, that your children will do better than you did, their children will do better than they, etc. Of course, the people that said this never offered any proof that this was so, but they bullied us and intimidated us into going along with this program anyhow. So now we're in a Keynes situation, and the Keynesian economy is supposed to be going up, 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 never down, no hiccups, no recessions, no depressions, and it's crap. It failed. Okay, it has had recession after recession after recession. The left, who favors Keynes and Keynesian economics, has had excuses for it always. They always manage to find some sort of a scapegoat for why it is that we're all of a sudden in a recession. But the point is that if having the government run our economy was the best way to do business, you wouldn't need a scapegoat, okay? Because the economy would never tank, okay? So it has, and that it means that Keynesian economics has failed, and that means it's time to go back to the drawing board. It's time to go back to the gold standard, partial or full. I don't know that we've ever done a full gold standard in this country's history, but that's what it's time for. Okay, this Keynesian economics has failed, is a failure, isn't going to get any better. There's no fixing it. It just fails. Okay. And so that's a prima facie case for change. You try something, you experiment with something, it fails. Hey, time to do something else. Okay. So I'm going to be reading today from a couple of new things, a couple of new books that I got that I think are very compelling and very interesting. And before I get to that, though, I'm going to read a little bit from the Ayn Rand lexicon, and then I'll go ahead and there's a little piece from Rush Limbaugh's show yesterday that I want to discuss when we come back. Okay, thank you very much. Welcome back. And from the Ayn Rand lexicon, let's see. It's collective rights is the entry for today. Since only an individual man can possess rights, the expression individual rights is a redundancy, which one has to use for purposes of clarification in today's intellectual chaos. But the expression collective rights is a contradiction in terms. Any group or collective, large or small, is only a number of individuals. A group can have no rights other than the rights of its individual members. A group as such has no rights. A man can neither acquire new rights by joining a group nor lose the rights which he does possess. The principle of individual rights is the only moral base of all groups or associations. Any group that does not recognize this principle is not an association, but a gang or mob. The notion of collective rights, the notion that rights belong to groups, not to individuals, means that rights belong to some men, but not to others. That some men have the right to dispose of others in any manner they please, and that the criterion of such privileged position consists of numerical superiority. The notion that anything society does is right because society chose to do it is not a moral principle, but a negation of moral principles and the banishment of morality from social issues. And I particularly like this particular entry, collective rights, because people talk about collective rights each and every day. They don't use that term, but what they do use is human rights, gay rights, women's rights, minority rights. But stop and think for a second, and let's flip those over and talk about animal. Oh, and there's even animal rights, because I was going to use in contrast to human rights. But they call that animal rights, and animals have no rights. Humans as a collective body have no rights. Each individual has rights, and they use these terms to get around the concept of individual rights. And I say they, I mean the left. And most people on the right speak of these things as though they truly exist. Human rights, women's rights. Well, wait a minute, what about men's rights? Never hear about that. Minority rights. Wait a minute, what about white rights? Never hear about that one either. See? I'm trying to think of the other one that I was using. But anyways, I think you get the point, is that there are no group rights. There's no black rights because there's no white rights. Okay, and there's no white rights because groups cannot have rights, only individuals. The whole idea of the Constitution is to guarantee the rights of each individual, regardless of their race, regardless of their gender, regardless of any other type of non-essential criteria. So, when I come back, a little bit of Rush Limbaugh. Thank you very much. Rush Limbaugh, and he's got an app that makes things easier. I wish Sean Hannity had an app. I can never find anything. I go on his website, and it's not done like Rush Limbaugh, where you can read clips of what he did yesterday. Sean Hannity's site is not podcast friendly, as it were. So here's a little clip that I want to play for you from yesterday's show, titled, "Why Are Democrats So Angry?"
The only thing the Democrats have, get rid of Republicans because it's ours. Get rid of the Republicans because we own it. Get rid of Republicans because power is ours. All of this negativism and panic and hysteria and paranoia from people who are so convinced that they're right. and so convinced that America agrees with them. So convinced that the American people want them back in power. Why then all of this rage and paranoia and anger?
So, just a second. Come on. There we go. Okay, so all of this rage, etc., and he says, and they want to be back in power. They don't. The left, the way the left works is it's called post-Marxist, if you really want to get right down to it. They used to be Marxists, and then came critical theory, and then after that, post-Marxism, and what is also called the New Left. So, but post-Marxism is based on Marxist principles, just not, they don't adhere to it as diligently as they would if they were Marxists. Marxism says that everything is already, it's somewhat fatalistic. It says everything's laid out already. We already know what's going to happen tomorrow. Okay, we know what's going to happen in the future. Okay, because of something he calls historical dialecticism. Power clashes between the haves and the have-nots. And he claims that the history indicates that what is going to happen is that the capitalists are going to be fading from the scene, that capitalism is going to overreach, that it's going to create a crisis, a worldwide, global labor management crisis that will result in a revolution and the ushering in of socialist paradise. Okay, that is foretold. That is the prediction of Karl Marx. Okay, so all Marxists buy into that. So it's not a question of want anymore. It's not a question of right and wrong anymore. It's not a question of we want power or we are right to do what we do. That's not where they're coming from. And of course, Rush Limbaugh should know this. I mean, he grew up as I did, in the shadow of the Soviet Union. I mean, communism and capitalism, that was, talking about it every day. And anybody that had even a high school education, a high school diploma, understood at least the basics of Marxism and what that was about. So the left doesn't say, well, I want things to be this or I want things to be that. The left is basically saying, look, to everybody, look, we all know what's going to happen. We all know that everything is it's inevitable. We will end up with socialist paradise. The only question is when that's going to happen. And what they're allowed to do is, and their attitude is also that what they're allowed to do is to try to hasten, make things happen a little bit quicker, right? So that's part of the reason they agitate. With Christians, it's almost like Christianity, except with Christians have to wait. There's nothing I can do to hasten the second coming of Jesus Christ. I can't do that. I don't have any such power. But according to Marxism, Marxists, the true believers, the vanguard, can do things to hasten this eventuality or this inevitability known as socialist paradise. Okay, so that's what their motive is. They're going to get into power and they're going to do things a certain way to get to socialist paradise. Now, you have two different ways of looking at it within the post-Marxist community, in that some claim that the only way we're going to get to socialist paradise is through revolution. Okay, others say no, it's not necessary. We can evolve into socialist paradise. We can legislate our way to socialist paradise. But in any case, the point is that when they're looking for power, it has nothing to do with right and wrong. It has nothing to do with what they want. It has nothing what to do with what they believing that people are going to vote them into power or anything else. It has to do with Marxism and the prediction of Marxism that socialist paradise is inevitable. So you'll hear the left always talking about being on the right side of history. And this is what they're talking about. And they believe they are on the right side of history, as though history is some kind of a force, which it isn't. Okay? It just isn't. Historical dialecticism is an interesting psychological, it's not even a philosophy, it's a psychology or a sociology, a sociological theory. And I contend also, by the way, that Marxism died with the advent of critical theory, that basically Marxism imploded. The people that called themselves Marxists, they were saying in the 1960s, hey, how come we haven't had a revolution yet? What's going on here? Why is it looks like we're no closer to having a revolution in socialist paradise today than we were, say, 30, 50, 100 years ago? And that's how critical theory was born. The idea that you could critic, because prior to that, the idea was Marx laid everything out for everybody. All you have to do is just fall into place, do what Marx says to do, and that's it. But you never, ever question Marxism. It's not to be questioned. Okay. So, in the 60s, they had to have an excuse to question Marxism, because the idea is if you start questioning Marxism, you're no longer a Marxist. You're a capitalist. You're an outsider. You're subversive or whatever their little lingo is for people, or the apostates, the people that fall away from the faith, so to speak. Okay, you're no longer part of the group. So the question in the 60s is, how can we have our cake and eat it too? How can we still be Marxists and at the same time criticize Marxism? And that's where critical theory came in. So the whole idea was this whole big, long, schmuckety-schmuck psychological mumbo-jumbo in order to rationalize the critique of Marxism. Okay, so once they were able to get critical theory accepted by whoever the big shot Marxists of the day were, then they were good to go in terms of criticizing Marxism and changing it and coming up with postmarxism. Okay. So the point being, again, that Rush is missing this in terms of understanding where it is that the left is coming from, what it is that they really want, or what it is that they're really doing. As far as they're concerned, they're just fulfilling their destiny. Okay, so whether they believe anybody will vote them in or they deserve to be voted into office doesn't matter to them. As far as they're concerned, socialist paradise is inevitable. Nobody can stop it. They couldn't stop it if they wanted to. BS, pure crap, but that's the true way they look at this. That's what explains their behavior. So when I come back, I have a couple of new books that I want to read from, and we'll go from there. So, thank you very much. So, the first one is called Riddles of Existence, and it's about metaphysics. The foundation. The foundation of philosophy, and philosophy is the foundation of everything else. And I say philosophy is the foundation for everything else. If you look at Einstein, and one of the ways that you can figure out that Einstein has gone wrong is that Einstein was heavily influenced by Hegel. And Hegel's main thing is he was the guy that created dialecticism. And, well, actually it was created or started by the Greeks, but Hegel more or less made it fashionable in the modern time. But he was the one that actually created historical dialecticism. Marx created a dialectical materialism, different things. So I was in error in my monologue when I was talking about this, or I'm sorry, not in my monologue, but my critique of Rush Limbaugh a minute ago. In any case, so he comes up with that idea where there's a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis. And that's the way progress is made. You clash two ideas, and whatever comes out of that clash is then a new thing, and this new thing then it becomes the new thesis, and then there'll be a new antithesis to clash with this thesis to provide, and that's the way it goes. It's crap. What happens is we learn. We go out and we look to learn things. We learn things, and then if and when our learning is exposed to be wrong, we correct our mistake, and then we move on. That's the way we make progress. We make it epistemologically, not through history, not psychologically. So, so when you look at Einstein in one of his theory of relativity, comes from that, the Hegel's theory, where he takes Newtonian ideas and clashes them. He comes up with a fantasy antithesis and clashes them together to create the synthesis, which he calls the theory of relativity. So, in any case, metaphysics is what this book is dealing with, and it's got some fascinating stuff. Chapter 1 is called Personal Identity by Theodore Sider. The concept of personal identity. On trial for murder, you decide to represent yourself. You're not the murderer, you say. The murderer was a different person from you. The judge asks for your evidence. Do you have photographs of a mustachioed intruder? Don't your fingerprints match those on the murder weapon? Can you show that the murderer is left-handed? No, you say. Your defense is very different. Here are your closing arguments. I concede that the murderer is a righty, like me, has the same fingerprints I do, is clean-shaven like me. He even looks exactly like me in the surveillance camera photographs introduced by the defense. No, I have no twin. In fact, I admit that I remember committing the murder. But the murderer is not the same person as me, for I have changed. That person's favorite rock band was Led Zeppelin. I now prefer Todd Rundgren. That person had an appendix, but I do not. Mine was removed last week. That person was 25 years old. I am 30. I'm not the same person as that murderer of 5 years ago. Therefore, you cannot punish me, for no one is guilty of a crime committed by someone else. Obviously, no court of law would buy this argument, and yet, what is wrong with it? When someone changes, whether physically or psychologically, isn't it true that he's not the same person? Okay, so at first blush, you're thinking, "Wow, that's a fascinating question." And what he's doing here, is not trying to contribute to intellectual discussion to enlighten people, but to confuse people. This is a deliberate attempt. This guy's a lefty, and he wants to undercut intellectuality and things intellectual. He wants to do so because what does that leave you with? It leaves you with analyzing the world from a psychological perspective. And once you start doing that, then you're easily manipulated, you're easily bullied and intimidated. Okay, so as far as this particular example is concerned, what he's doing, the trick he's doing to make this seem like, wow, isn't this fascinating, and have you actually start thinking about it and going in circles, and then eventually you become frustrated and throw up your hands and say, screw the whole thing. Right? The trick he's using is analysis by non-essentials. What it is to be a human being, there's an essential. There's a human being is a concept, and human beings are different from non-human beings. Dogs are different than non-dogs, cats, for instance, right? Now, they have some certain qualities in common. A dog is not a dog because he has a coat of hair, fur. Cats have fur. Rabbits have fur. A dog is not a dog because he stands on four legs. Cats stand on four legs. Or because he has eyes or ears or whiskers. Okay, all of those things are also attributable to cats. But there is something that makes an essence, that makes a dog and nothing else. That's the key to true identity, is finding that essence, whatever that essence happens to be, and identifying it. And once you've identified that essence, you've identified the the thing, so to speak, in this case, the dog. Same thing goes with human being. I am me because there's certain things, certain essentials that I have that makes me different from every other human being. There are also things that I possess that I have in common with other human beings. I walk on two legs. I have two eyes in the front of my head. That kind of thing. But those are non-essentials. And so what he's basically doing is playing the game of defining by non-essentials, such as an appendix. That's not what makes this guy, this person, let's call him Fred. That's not what makes Fred Fred. It's what makes Fred human. Part of what makes him human. His taste in music is, again, not what makes Fred Fred. It makes Fred in a part of a particular group. What he's quoting here is Todd Rundgren and Led Zeppelin, so he'd be part of a group called rock fans, or rock star fans, or people that like rock music. Human beings that like rock music. But it has nothing to do with the essence of who Fred is. Okay? That's who committed the murder. Fred committed the murder. And again, we know all this intuitively, by the way. We know all of this by the evidence of our senses, that it was him and the same person, even though he may be a little bit older and his tastes have changed, that doesn't mean he's a different person. So the argument's not valid. But that's the trick he's using here, is definition by non-essentials. Ayn Rand recognized this trick. There's another good reason to read a lot of Ayn Rand's nonfiction works. Very, very educational. The other thing of this is what he's doing is he is pretending that this is a fresh argument. This is a brand new argument. That this is something that has come about recently. When in reality, these are questions that have been wrestled with and actually, in most cases, have been solved 2,000 years ago. These are questions that were dealt with by Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, among others. So, that's one of the things I want to bring about, because the left uses this kind of trick constantly. To confuse people, to try to convince them that they're right. More of a power play than anything else. So, anyways, when we come back, my other book is called The Metaphysics of War, and there's a couple of quotes in there I think that'll be interesting. Thank you very much. And so this is it's called The Metaphysics of War. And the first chapter is called The Forms of Warlike Heroism. And I'm only going to read a couple of paragraphs of this. But the fundamental principle underlying all justifications of war from the point of view of human personality is heroism. War, it is said, offers man the opportunity to awaken the hero who sleeps within him. War breaks the routine of comfortable life by means of its severe ordeals. It offers a transfiguring knowledge of life according to death. The moment the individual succeeds in living as a hero, even if it is the final moment of his earthly life, weighs infinitely more on the scale of values than a protracted existence spent consuming monotonously among the trivialities of cities. From a spiritual point of view, these possibilities make up for negative and destructive tendencies of war, which are one-sidedly and tendentiously highlighted by pacifist materialism. War makes one realize the relativity of human life, and therefore also the law of a more than life. And thus war has always an anti-materialist value, a spiritual value. And I'm bringing this up for a couple of reasons. First of all, that everybody's a hero today, thanks to the left. Okay, left, one of the objectives of the left is to get rid of war. They want it gone. And they think that that's doable, that's an attainable goal, is to rid the earth of war. So what they do, they figure, well, let me see, what is it that gets people to go for and become warlike or become warriors and wish to engage in war? And they recognize that it was the heroic or heroism. And they recognize that if they could get rid of that concept, obliterate it, that if not all of the reason, then certainly the largest reason for people going to war would be gone. And very possibly we would be indeed rid of war. So how can you do that? How do you get rid of a concept? Well, one of the ways to do it is to tell people not to think about it or not to talk about it. But that's extremely difficult to do. If I tell you not to think about a purple elephant with pink polka dots, you have to think about it in order to know what it is you're not supposed to think about. So it's kind of counterproductive on that side. The other way to do it is to use an anti-concept. That's the second way. Find another concept that will effectively obliterate the other concept, the concept you want gone. The third way to do it is by over-utilization of the concept itself. In this particular case, heroism. And that's what the left does. They simply declare everybody to be a hero. Did you make it to work today? You're a hero. Did you get through the day at work? You're a hero. Did you, you're fighting for environmental causes? You're a hero. John McCain is a hero. Well, he served honorably, but I don't see anything that he did in his service records that indicates that he's a hero. To me, a hero is the person that sacrifices himself for the good of others. The guy that throws himself on a grenade to keep his buddies from getting killed. That's heroic. So, but again, they overutilize it. Everybody's a hero. Everything is heroic, especially in sports. They really like to use it in sports. Wow, what a hero. Boy, that was a heroic effort. And what it does is it trivializes the term, and eventually it will no longer be utilized. Nobody will be talking about being a hero, especially when it comes to war. And then thereby they hope to get rid of war. So the second part of this is that there is a need for war, and there's a need for warriors. Right now we have changed things since the Vietnam War, where the anti-Vietnam campaign was meant again to really to get rid of war completely in its entirety, not just the Vietnam War. And for quite a while, it seemed to work well. Everybody had a negative, and they did it basically by encouraging people to have a negative viewpoint of the military and the men and women serving in the military. When they came back from Vietnam, they were spit on and called baby killers. And so the idea then, of course, is if nobody wants to serve, we won't have any armed forces, and if we don't have any armed forces, then we won't have any wars. The same thing with the same idea applied to underground groups like the Weathermen that went out and bombed ROTC headquarters, or went to various military bases to try to commit murder and to destroy property. Again, the idea, if they can scare people to keep them away from military bases and joining the military, then nobody joins, no military, no war. So, and for a long time, the military enjoyed a rather poor reputation. In some cases, some part of that was because of the military's own problems that they incurred. Right after the Vietnam War ended, all of the people were let go that were they were discharged from the Army, and a lot of which were mainly junior ranking individuals. So you ended up with a top-heavy Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines. You had a lot of senior NCOs, a lot of NCOs but you didn't have any privates. You didn't have anybody that was going to be able to, fill out a platoon, grab a rifleman, or even the simple stuff, the non-war stuff, such as who's going to mow a lawn, who's going to buff the floors, who's going to clean the latrine. The NCOs aren't going to do that. That's the job for the junior enlisted people, but they're all gone. They were let out of the military. So the military started accepting people and refusing to discharge them. They needed the junior military people so badly that the junior enlisted people could get away with murder. They could get away with flipping people off, telling to F off, because they knew nobody's going to bother to court-martial me, because they need me more than they need the NCOs or the officers. And so you also had junior enlisted people that also became drug dealers. Okay, and because also the military wasn't screening properly. So in any case, the point is that that helped to bring the reputation of the military down, and we ended up bringing back the reputation of the military through a movement called, you may not like the war, but respect our troops. Okay, respect the troops. Hate the war, but respect the troops. So we've made a step in the right direction of having the military make a comeback. And war is a necessity. It happens. It's going to happen, and we need to be ready for it. We need warriors, and we need a warrior ethos. So, but anyways, again, one of the tricks that the left likes to play, called obliterating a concept, in this particular case, doing it by overusing that particular concept. In this particular case, hero. Okay, so on that note, that brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. I thank you for listening, and until next time, have a great day.